Hello and welcome to the Alpha Anywhere demo and Q&A webcast. I'm Dave McCormick, VP of Product Management, and I'm pleased to be joined today by Dion McCormick, no relation, a solutions engineer, as well as Sarah Mitchell, also no relation, our Director of Customer Success. Today, Dion is going to be going over, I believe, web services.
Web services,
Sarah's, excellent. And I believe Sarah's going to do a follow-up on that. In another webinar. So it's going to be a couple of web services, ones which I think you're going to find really interesting. So I hear that you're there. That's terrific. Let's go ahead and see if screen sharing works. We didn't test this out ahead of time, so it's always makes it much more exciting.
I set them up, Sarah knocks them down. So,
hey, there's your PowerPoint. It all worked out.
Yeah, cool. Excellent. Well, thank you, everybody. I do appreciate it. And as always, we know you have a very valuable schedule and time, especially as we get closer to the Christmas side. I'm sure everybody's like quickly trying to finish all those things so they can enjoy the week and enjoy the Christmas holidays. And so thank you very much for joining us. As always, not only do we have a presentation, but we're here to answer your questions. So make sure to go to the Q&A section, or rather the questions section of the GoToWebinar control panel, and put your questions in there. And always, and this came, actually our presentation today came from someone who sent a email into guides@alphasoftware.com looking for more information about our subject matter for today. So you can always put emails, into that, guides@alphasoftware.com, and we monitor that and we use that for these presentations and other pieces there. So we're excited to have you. And so today what we want to talk about is a very important subject in terms of where the overall market is going and how Alpha is maturing to be able to work in and fit in and take advantage of that overall market. And I got to tell you, I love this subject because it's super valuable and there's so many cool things you can do with it. And it really unlocks an enormous amount of value for everybody's application. And what's interesting, actually, Dave, over the last couple of months, I've gotten so much more information, or sort of inquiries and information. People are interested in this element. It's sort of like there's an awakening kind of going on in the marketplace about it. And what we're going to be talking about is APIs and Alpha's web service technology. And what I like about this is not only is it a cool subject, not only can it really do wonderful things for people in terms of unlocking value, enhancing value, but the other part that's really cool about it is the fact that Alpha did just such an incredible bang up job of implementing this that it's easy. It's easy to take advantage of. There's a little nuances. And actually, Sarah will probably go into more of those than me. I'm just going to kind of do the groundwork today. But the cool thing about this technology is it's easy to take advantage of and start experimenting and having fun with it, playing with it. And then once you get a handle on it, the Katie bar the door. It's basically, you can do an enormous amount of really cool things with it. So today's presentation is a quick introduction to the API technology, or web services as it's called in there. We're going to build a simple one. We're going to show you how there's some really cool built-in tools to handle it. And I think you're really going to enjoy it. I think it's a cool subject. I enjoy talking about it, and I enjoy talking to everybody about it. So again, what the first thing is, and I'm sure everybody in RMs have heard about APIs and have seen a lot of, there's actually whole companies and businesses that have literally built their whole business out of API. So an example would be Twilio. Twilio, there's not really a Twilio app out there. I know they are buying and extending into that kind of area, but they started out as basically an API vendor. They basically had a set of services hosted on their servers that allow you to do communication things, send SMS messages, emails, etc. But there wasn't really a email client or a SMS client. The background was they said, listen, we're going to provide you the services so you can wrap and roll your own and put on top of it. We'll take care of all the quote unquote plumbing for you, but you can build your own user interface. You can tie it into an existing one. So it was a really cool, and it's an API centric company, and that's a big business. I just read an article last week, Dave. It was very interesting about a company that is basically our APIs only around medical billing. So, which is a very complex, but they've built a whole set of services around medical billing, but they don't have like an app that you use to actually create a bill, submit a bill, validate it, do all those other things there. They basically allow you to connect it to your existing or build an app on top of it. And so it's really neat. So right now, and that's a key differentiator I want to kind of talk with everybody, is that right now when most people work with Alpha, the way they think about it is you have your database and then you have your user interface on top of it. You may wrap certain things in XBasic classes, etc., but it's sort of like you're tying that user interface directly to the database, and that's fine, and that works fabulous. But there are certain limitations. You create the interface. Let's say you want someone else to create an interface on top of your information, your logic, your other pieces there. Well, then it gets a little tricky. I mean, do you want them to connect to your database directly? Probably not, because you may be changing that database. There may be security issues and other things like that. So you run into these challenges of how do you actually allow to connect and work with your existing application without having to generate an API. And that's what this is all about, is that now what you can do is basically wrap your database, wrap your XBasic code and other things in there with an API, present that in a secure fashion, and then allow third parties to interact with your base system. And it really is exciting. Once you start using it and exploring it, you realize there's so many cool things you can do. And in fact, you can take your Alpha app, and then instead of connecting directly from the UX to the database or there, you can actually go through your own API layer. And you don't have to do that. You can do a mix and match of both. But I see more and more people are trying to do that, because then everything works off that API layer from that standpoint. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through a demonstration today, and I want to show you kind of how to build one and what are the different pieces that go into building a web service on Alpha, and also some of the cool built-in tools that allow you to not only create it effectively, quickly, and simply, but also how to support it through documentation, publishing, etc. So we'll do some fun things along those lines there. So very important here, you'll see that the architecture, and I want to cover this just for a moment, is that out in the outside world, you have an API call. And an API call in the web world is just like someone calling a web page. You're basically calling a specific endpoint on a server, and instead of getting HTML back, you get basically data back. You could get HTML. I mean, you know, you can embed that in there, but it's about moving data back and forth between applications. So this API call first goes to the application, the server. The application server says, hey, thank you. Should I display you a web page? Should I take you to this? Or, oh, I see, you want one of my web services. So it actually connects to a web service that you have built, and that's what we'll do today. Then that web service actually calls an XBasic class to do what you want to do. So think of this web service here as just sort of a traffic cop. It's in the middle between the app server and your code. And in here, it defines a lot of requirements. It also defines like security and stuff. And we'll explore that a little bit more from there. So then the API comes in, the app server passes it to the web server service. This web service says, okay, are you authenticated? Yes. Okay. What are you trying to do? Oh, okay, let me map and pass that information to this XBasic class. And then the XBasic class will do its thing, maybe talk to the database, do calculations, do any number of things, and then pass that data back to the Alpha web service that then takes that information and sends it back to the calling entity. So it's sort of a layer in there. And the beauty of it is now, anytime they talk to you, they're not going against these classes or data. It's going through here. So if you want to change any of them, this is one of the most powerful aspects of API structures, is that let's say you wanted to go in and you wanted to change your database and you wanted to say, my customers and addresses. Let's say you originally had a table in here under data where it was a customer, and in there you had 3 addresses as fields in that table. Then you go, oh, next week you go, I want to give them basically unlimited number of addresses. So I'm going to break that into a customer table and then an address table and link them together. Well, if you've given people direct access to that data, then they have to reconstruct how they do their code. But what's cool with the Alpha Web Service is that you can basically modify your XBasic class that collects the data from the database in that new format, but then sends it back in the same original format you had before. So therefore, everything up here doesn't have to change. It just says, oh, okay, great. So that gives you enormous amount of flexibility on you to migrate and mutate your app, because you don't have these fixed structures that have been exposed to people that they need to see. So that's one of the cool advantages, is that APIs really allow you to kind of wrap your environment with a standard way for people to talk and get data to your system. And then you inside of that little cocoon can change things around. And as long as what's called the signature of that web service stays the same, the data that's passed back is in the same structure, then you're golden. So that's a cool little thing we can do, which is really neat from there. So again, API calls in, goes to the app server. The app server says, oh, it's a web service. We'll have this person handle it. They call the right class. That does its thing, sends the information back, and then this delivers it back to the API call. And you'll see all that today from here. Now, what I'm going to demonstrate, and I want to give you a view of it before we get into it, is the following. Is basically how it works when you're developing is you start your development work, you first generate your XBasic class. And what's cool is if you already have classes out there, you can reuse them. You don't have to create special unique ones, although there are little nuances that I'll explain about the class from there. Then once you have your class, you generate your web service, you do your testing. What's cool is you can test directly against the class, so you make sure this is working great. Then you can test against the web service, and Alpha builds in some nice features to allow you to do that easily. You can create a test page for doing that. You deploy it, and then you're good to go, and your people can then do it. Now, during this process, which is cool, is that Alpha will create documentation of your API to help support that. And that's really neat, because then the whole, oh, I created this, now I have to tell people how to do it. I'm going to show you some really cool things around there. It's so cool that it automatically generates things for you for other languages, etc. It's neat. So what we're going to do is a quick demonstration. I'm going to create an XBasic class, wrap it as a web service, test it, and I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to deploy to Alpha Cloud. We'll do it. I don't think I have everything there, but you'll see the extent of what we're going to do today. Okay, so I'm in my Alpha project. Well, any requests, if you have any requests, put them into the questions. Both Sarah and Dave will be monitoring that, and we can answer any questions that pop up or any things you would like to see. So step number one is for you to generate an XBasic class. Now, quick introduction to XBasic classes. Some people I'm sure are using it, some aren't. But the cool thing about XBasic classes is that I'm in the development environment, I'm into XBasic, the XBasic area here, the navigator. So I'm going to click no. When you click new, you're able to select many different things. One, you can create a script. This is for testing local stuff. It doesn't get published to your server. You can create a function library, a module, or a class. These have been around, sort of like if you think about it, this has been around the longest. This is like a little newer. This is the latest kind of phase. You want to make sure you use your XBasic class, because the XBasic class is the web services expects to it. So you may already have some code and functions and libraries. They're very easy to migrate to a class. And you unlock a lot of really cool things. The neat thing about XBasic class, and it really predates all the web service stuff, is XBasic classes allow you to take XBasic and create objects, use object-oriented technology to encapsulate your logic. And so there's other benefits of using classes. The number one thing I like about classes is once I built a class, I can literally copy that class over to a different project, and all my code is ready to go and I can reuse it. So it's really good for code reuse. And so anytime I do things like if I have a UX or something like that, I try to not put my XBasic code in that UX or grid. I actually try to put it in a class and then call it. And the reason why is that promotes reuse. And it's just kind of a personal way to do it. It also allows you to do testing, which I'll show you in a little bit, makes life easier in terms of when you're doing tests. So again, when you're doing web services, it does require classes, but these other functional capabilities still work in the system and are good to go. So I'm going to go ahead and create a new XBasic class. And actually on my version here, this insert's not highlighted, but you can actually, and I'll show you in a moment, I'm just going to copy this right now. Actually, copy that, go back here and put it here, and I'll come back and show you that in a moment. Okay. Let me show you this real quick. But on the insert, there is a number of things that it's just on mine when you create a brand new file, for whatever reason on this version it didn't. But what's nice in here is you have this insert button here, is that when you have an existing file, you can quickly insert a function declaration. Let me go ahead and show you that. I can just say, hey, insert, and it's something about this version. So I can say insert function declaration, and it just puts in a function. Where did that like go right here? Insert function declaration, and you can see it just puts that structure in there. And so I use that a lot when I'm creating my classes and other things here. When you create an initial one here, and you can just say insert, come on, class definition for REST API. Now you'll see there's two of them here, class definition and class definition for REST API. You want to use this one because it adds a few little things that are really good for a API, and I'll show you in a moment. So I create a new file, I click that, and basically I get this. It just puts in essentially a little prototype code. I can go in here and start changing it, and you'll see this is my class. So it starts with define class. I give it a namespace and a name, and then an in class, and then in here I can put my functions, and the functions are the different functional elements. So as you can see, beyond just talking about object-oriented technology, it's a really nice way to just encapsulate all your functions into a single place. So I create that function here. Let's go ahead and save this, and I'm going to call this gkr.demo. It's picking up this right here. Now, what does this mean? I want to spend just 2 moments on that so you don't get confused. You'll see when I define the class, it says gkr : then demo. I could actually have called it, ABC, whatever. I could go like that. That's the class name. But what this does is the item before the little 2 colons is my namespace. And then what's after it is the actual name of this class. Now, why do we do that? The reason we do that is the following, is that if I just created a class called user, like let's say I was creating a user class and I just created it class user, and I was working with someone else and I copied this into there, they may have also created a class called user for their purposes. So what the namespace does is it just tells it that it's a little different. So I would call it GKR user. When I copied that into their project, I wouldn't step on top of their class because it would say, oh, this one's different from their user, my user. So I highly recommend you always pick and use some kind of namespace when you're creating your classes, because what that allows you to do is it just gives you more flexibility in terms of multiple projects, handing it to people to use, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So again, I went up here, clicked insert, created my class. I named it something that I want it to be. In this case, GKR demo, saved it, and it put it down there as gkr.demo. And you see it has A5X basic class, or XB class is the file type. So step number 1 is creating that. So when it does, it creates some sample variable, but notice it's also created this called HTTP status. That is something that's API specific, and we'll show in a moment. And then it creates a sample method. So let's create the classic. I'm just going to edit this. I'm going to go hello world, and I am going to return the following to make it a little bit more there. And I'm going to put in message. I'm going to put a little piece of JSON in here. Sorry. Okay. And then I'll show you what this is here. So the idea is I have a function here in my class called hello world. And when I call that, basically I am going to return some information. In this case, I'm going to return a message here, a hard-coded message here. Now you'll see down here, there's this little part here, which is about the HTTP status. And I'm not going to go into big default, but there are industry standard statuses for HTTP that tell the calling thing what happened. So again, remember in our architecture, someone makes this call, comes down here and gets an information back. Well, when it gets the information back, they have these HTTP statuses to say, for instance, 200 success, meaning that everything went smooth. There's also a status called 401 that an error occurred. So this is your way to communicate back to them, was their API call successful? If not, or didn't, then was there an error or was it an authentication error? And it's industry standard. So by adding this in, I'm basically returning, when I return this answer, this status here. So this is very important because industry standard, you want these statuses so people who use your API work pretty good. So let's just go ahead and save this. And to show you that before I even run a web service, I can test this out. So let's go ahead and go in. I'm going to create a new script. And I'm going to go dim my object as GKR : demo. Okay. So I created an instance of my object here. And now I want to call the hello world program. So I can say result is equal to my object dot hello, and you'll see, right there, it tells me what it is there. So I'll go hello world. And now I'm going to show var result. So basically I'm creating an instance of the object, I'm calling that function on there, and I want to show the result. And voila, when I press the lightning bolt, it runs it, and guess what? That hard-coded message comes back. So now what I can do is I can have a whole bunch of different functions in there, and I just have to say my object dot whatever that function call is. Now, the reason I wanted to show you this is that obviously the nice thing about this is that I can now fully test, before I even generate my web service, I can go into this class and start testing it. I can give it examples. I can try different things and see if the results are the same. I can create automated tests on there. So I can make sure that that XBasic class is rock solid. And I do that before I generate the web service because I want to make sure that everything's working perfect before I do that. And the way I do that is I create the object, or the class, excuse me, and then I write little scripts to run and test that from there. And this could have been in a user interface. You could actually wrap that object and call it in your UX to do things like that. Anyway, so that's one thing, is I highly recommend making sure you test your classes, because then when you get to the web service, you're not worrying about is the class itself working properly. So I've created my sample web app here, or I'm sorry, not web app, but class, and I'm ready to wrap that into a web service. Now, when I go to the next thing to show you that, there's actually some really cool things, and I'm going to come back, I'm going to go through this and then come back and show you some built-in neat things that you can do. So once I've got my class ready, it's all good to go. I can go to Web Projects Control Panel, and then over on the left-hand side, you can see right next to XBasic is Web Services. So I'm going to click on Web Services. This takes me into there. You can see I haven't created any yet, so I'm ready to create a new web service. So I'm going to click New up here in the left-hand corner. I am then given an option of different types of web services. So let's go through these real quick. First is a definition to consume a SOAP web service. So SOAP is a older technology. It is used a lot still in the industry because there's a lot of existing platforms that use it. And it's still valuable. But in this case, we're not creating a SOAP interface to send stuff to people. This would be if I want to create one to consume SOAP from someone else. So if I were building an alpha application here that would call their system, they may use SOAP, and this helps you do it. One thing that's nice about SOAP, they have a definition language, so it makes it easy to generate. Haven't done a lot of it. Most people are migrating onto REST services because it's more the industry standard. There's more support for it, but this is built into it to allow you to do it. Now you'll see I have two options down here for REST. One is to create a new definition to consume a REST service. So similar to this, if I wanted to create a definition, a web service in my system to call someone else's REST service, then a web service that would call someone else, you can do that from here. And I'm not going to cover that today, but that's kind of nice because it writes a whole bunch of code for you and makes your life simpler. What I really want to do is create a new definition to create a REST service. Because remember, I'm sort of the catcher. I'm the one who's going to wait for those messages and send the information out from there. So I'm going to select this one right here. Now, what's kind of cool, and I'm going to come back to this in a few moments, is that they have a built-in Genie that allows you to take your database tables that you have and expose them and allow you to create a REST service right out of the gate with it. And I'm going to come back and show you that in a few minutes, but I don't want to go into that yet. But that's kind of cool. If you just wanted to allow someone to connect to your database tables, this is the way to do it. Now, this is quick and dirty. It works. It's effective. But the downside is now your web service is tightly integrated with your table structure. May not be what you want. So remember what I mentioned is that if I go in and change this table structure, if I use this technique right here, I basically have to regenerate and give them a new set of web services because now that table may be named something differently, etc. So this is fun actually just to get started really quick, but the negative of it is you're kind of locking yourself into your web service looks exactly like your database, which is not the way to go, to be honest. What I'm going to do is start with an empty web service where I'm going to create a service based on my own classes, because in my classes, I can then talk to the database. And I'll show you that example in a few moments. So I'm going to create a new empty service. Okay, so this is kind of a busy interface, but we're going to walk through it step by step. So, and again, I'll stop in a few moments after this segment to see if there's immediate questions, but I kind of want to make sure we get through this part before we go to that point from there. So first thing you'll notice up in the left-hand corner, it's saying add a new class. So remember, as we mentioned, and I hope people aren't, is that a web service basically uses the class to talk to it. So I have to tell it, well, for this web service, what class or classes am I going to use? So you can see up here, it's empty. So for this web service, I'm going to click add new class. Now you'll see it shows me all the classes. And in fact, you can select multiple of them, but I'm going to select that one that I just created there. I'm going to click OK. So the moment I did that, the system said, OK, it looked at that class and it said, hey, what functions or methods were available in there? And in my case, only one function called hello world. Now I could have 5, 10, 20 of these. That's all great. And you'll notice right now it says red. So that means that if I generate this web class, I can't use it. I need to actually tell it a little more information. But that's one thing that's kind of nice is that if you have a class, you'll have some functions that you're going to expose or be used by your API people. You may have other functions in there that you don't want to expose, you don't have to it. So it's not an all or one deal. It's basically you get to pick and choose within a class which functions or methods you do to it. So what I do is I want to expose this hello world. So I'm going to double click on that and it opens up this new screen because I'm telling it I want people to be able to access this hello world. And you'll notice it says, do you want to expose this method in the service? And the answer is yes. Okay. Now, and you'll see there's some documentation here if you'd like to look at it. It's all built into it. It's kind of handy. So that's available there. Now, when I expose a function, and we'll come back to this in a few moments, there's a way to expose it. It's called a REST verb. So basically, when you're using an API, you can use get, which just basically is a, hey, give me back some information. Or you can use a post, which is, here's some information I'm giving to you, do something with it and give me the information back there. So for instance, if I wanted to write a API endpoint where I gave it a customer record and I wanted the web service to write that into the database, you would use something like post. You could actually use get because get can use what are called query parameters, but most likely use post. And then I'm not going to go into much detail, but there's delete, update. These are industry standard terms for web services, and they're used in different, patch is like to be, is sort of like, you have update to like update a record, etc. So the neat thing about it is that Alpha conforms with industry standards very tightly and allows you to create these endpoints that match what other people accept. So in this case, this hello world is a get. All I want to do is call it, get some information back. So I'm going to select get here. And you'll see that it's automatically given the path as the name of the method. Now, real quick on that, that is fine. That sounds great. But what you may want to do is give it your own specific name. And what it does is it basically maps it from there to that function, because you may have a naming convention on the function that's different from what people would think. It may have your own kind of characters and the way it's done. So there's a lot of flexibility in terms of how you map things. So you don't have to use the function name as the API endpoint, but you can do that. And I'm going to come back to this authenticated in a second. Okay. So I've done that. You'll see I have told for this web service, I want to use this class. I want to expose this service, and you'll notice that it's got a green and it's got a little lock that's unlocked that says it's unauthenticated, meaning that when you put this up, anybody can call it. There's no authentication. We're going to talk about that in a few moments. So there you go. I mean, I talked a lot, but really all you have to do is select the class, select the method you want to expose, tell it how you want to expose it, and you're good to go. Now, I'm going to go ahead and do the following. I'm going to save this, and I'm going to call this as demo service. Okay, so you'll notice that it created my demo service back here in there. Now, what's really cool, and this is what, back to my discussion, is that once you create this, you don't, I'll show you different ways to call it, but what's cool is you can actually literally test it instantly. And that's through what's called the live test the API function here. So I'm going to go ahead and click this, and it's got a little lightning bolt to show you it's immediate. And what that's going to do is open up a web page, a pre-made web page that allows you to exercise that endpoint or endpoints. Now you'll notice something. You'll notice all this stuff around it. Okay, first and foremost, this web page is an industry standard. If you've done anything with API, I'm sure you've seen this, but there is a company, I think it's SmartBear, that created what's originally called Swagger, but now OpenAPI, which is an industry way of showing API information and documenting it. And it's really nice because you'll see in a few moments with that information, other people can literally take this and auto-generate code and other stuff. It's really exciting from there. But you'll see here, it says, here's my demo service endpoint. I've got a version on it. And you'll see down here, it's got one endpoint called Hello World and Git. So I'm going to click on there. And this gives me some more documentation. You'll notice it says, are there any parameters here? Because you may create endpoints that have parameters like a customer ID to pull a certain customer, things like that. And here is the response that comes back. Notice that 200 there. So let's go ahead and try this out. That's what's cool too, is not only can I see the documentation, but I can click here and try it out. And so you'll see when I did that, it says execute. I click execute, and there's my result. I got a 200 code, meaning everything went great. And then there's my message, hello world. So I'm done. I've created my web API, and you'll notice it did all the heavy lifting for me. And which is kind of nice in here, it actually shows me the curl command. I know some people in the audience have used curl. It's an industry standard tool that allows you to basically run and call web pages and web services from a command line. So I can literally copy this, put it into my command line, and run this, and it will basically run like a command line. So it's really handy from there. And there are actually tools that will take this and turn it into code. So this is called live test. And basically when I've created it, I can just click live test and I'm good to go. I can also look at what's called the Swagger definition. And this is that industry standard definition here. It's minimal now, but you can enhance it. Like you can change it. And this is what you can give to someone else, then they know how your API is structured from there. So that's live test. There's another really, really cool capability in here, and it's right here called create a test API page for your project. So you'll see we have this was a live test, but let's say I wanted to have this in there all the time. All I have to do is click create a test API, create it, and I'm going to call it test API page, and it's been created. I'm going to save and cancel this. I'm going to go to my A5W page and check it out. Let me go ahead and do this here. Let me profile, target, API, demo. So like I've created my API. I can literally publish it, local web root. First time I published here, so that's why this is doing this. I can actually publish and open it. And there you go. It brings up that page right there. And there's demo. I click on demo, and here's my same thing. So now what's really cool about this, and I think this is really, really neat, and again, kind of shows the thinking that went into Alpha developing this technology. I can literally put this on my server, send this to someone, the API, this web page address, and they can go on and play with my API. And in fact, if I have secure APIs where I've authenticated things, it handles all that. So you don't have to worry about accidentally sending out something you want secure. So this is really cool. Basically, I can create an API page, post it, give it to people, and then people can play with it, try it out, etc. Obviously, you'd probably want that on a test environment so they're not mucking up real data from there. So that's a neat feature that's built into the web service that basically at any time I can create a test API. So if I change this, I can recreate that and it will work great from there. Okay, so that's a pretty simplistic example. So let's say next week I go, you know what, I want to look up some information from a database and give that information to them. Okay, so what I want to do is now I want to go in to my XBasic class and add more functionality. Now, before I do that, I want to show you tools, alpha video, connection string. I've got a little connection string and a sample data. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to go into here and I'm going to create, I'm just going to copy this. And I'm going to say, I'm going to create a new function. So I'm creating a new function and it's going to call DB data. Let's just call it DB data. Okay. And I'm going to go ahead and get rid of this here. So what I want to do is call my database and return some JSON to send to the person. So I could code that, but why do that? Who wants to do that? I want Alpha to do the work for me. So I'm going to click here. I'm going to right click and I'm going to go to the Genie XBasic SQL Actions code generator. And you're going to find out this thing is awesome because it's like peanut butter and chocolate. I mean, web services use JSON. This does it all from there. So I'm going to go ahead and select that. It brings up my Genie and it says, well, I want to query the database to get some JSON data. That's what we want to do there. So I'm going to click OK. So it brings up this page here. This is my Genie that allows me to build this. So first thing I'm going to do is select my connection string. It's asking me how I want to do it. Fields from the table, but this could be calling a stored procedure. So I'm going to go up here and I'm going to go ahead and let's take assets. And that's just a table in there. And I'm going to say, just grab a few things here. And you'll notice it's generated the code. I can actually test this here. And you'll see that it takes care of generating JSON for me. I didn't have to write any code. It did it. And you'll see here are the fields that are in that, I'm sorry, the data that's in there, but presented in this information here. Now, one thing that's kind of cool is I could create filters and ordering, and all of these elements can then be exposed in my API to allow them to say, you know, filter those pieces there. But I'm going to keep it really dead simple for today. So I can, one thing I highly recommend is click Save Settings. I'm going to call this Asset. And what that allows you to do is when you come back in here, you can click Load and you don't have to redo all this work up here. And guaranteed you'll go through this a couple times till you get it fine-tuned to what you want. So highly recommend you there. Okay, so I'm going to copy the code to the clipboard. I'm going to click OK. And it tells me it's been copied. And I'm just going to go right here and I'm going to paste that code. And I'm going to move it over so it looks okay. So now what happens is when this function gets called, it runs all this code here. And the result is it calls the database, runs this query, blah, blah, blah. And so what I want to do is I want to return this JSON. So I'm going to go db_data is equal to JSON. JSON is what is generated. I mean, I could put this right there, but this is what's going to be returned. And then if there are errors, and I'm not going to go into that now, you could trigger this to say, oh, there was an error. Right now, if there's an error, it basically just closes it. But in this case, if I were really enhancing this, if there were an error in here, I would set this error so it returns a 401 so the person knows that that doesn't work correctly. So I just went into my class, I created a new function, I then created the code automatically using it to return it, and I'm going to save that. So now before I go my web service, I want to make sure this is working. So I'm just going to go back to here, change this to be db_data, and hit go. Oh, looks good. It runs, there's no errors, it's returning some information back there. It's in a JSON format, we're good to go. So again, that's the other thing. Again, use these scripts to test your stuff before you put it into web service. That way you don't deal with weird stuff. And you can actually create tests that will fail, so you can check both positive and negative failure situations or test events. Okay, so now I now have got my XBasic class updated. I can now go into my web service. I'm gonna go to web service here. I'm going to reopen that up here, and you'll notice it has everything I have, but notice what's here. Oh, since it knows about this class, when I reopen this, it said, hey, guess what? I found a new function or method that you can use. And currently, by default, I'm not going to expose it for you, so you have to tell me there. So in this case, I do want to, so I'm going to go ahead and go right here. I'm going to expose that. Now what I'm going to use the get verb because all I'm doing is getting some data, and it is authenticated this time. So you'll notice now I have my new web service. It's endpoint. This is called an endpoint. This whole thing is a web service. So I now have 2 endpoints here. I can save that, and I can actually live test it by clicking there. And now you'll notice when I live test it that I have 2 endpoints, DB data and hello world. Click get. Let's try it out. Execute and check that out. Here's my curl command, and here's my response body from right here. So pretty neat stuff there. And in fact, I'm going to go ahead and publish this whole thing so everything's good. Let's go ahead and publish everything here. Okay. I'm going to go back in. I'm going to close that live preview, but remember, we have that test. Go here. Let's go ahead and go to A5W page. My test page. Click demo. And notice I didn't have to republish that or recreate that test page. It said, oh, I know this web service. I can dynamically look this data up. So again, once you've got this going, it's really nice from that standpoint there. Now, what I want to show you, which is really, really cool, is this, is that, let me go ahead and go to DB data, and let's try it out and do the execute there. Okay, so right now I've been using Alpha, but there's a great tool, and I highly recommend if you're going to do anything with, let's see, go here to my workspace. If you're going to do anything with APIs, I would definitely look at a tool, a free tool called Postman. So I'm going to go ahead and create a new, let's see, where is it? Let's go all the way down here. There. Let's just create a new, I'm going to create a new request. So I'm not going to go into detail here, but what Postman does, which is really cool, is that it basically allows you to exercise APIs without having to write a bunch of code and do other things like that. There's another one also called Insomnia. I hear good things about that one also, but Postman's kind of the industry standard. So I'm going to go ahead and click a request. Okay, I'm going to call this DB data as my request. And let's go ahead and all collections. I'll put it in Slack fund just for now. Okay. Okay, so it creates this request here. So I'm going to go back here, and you'll notice where it's calling is this is the actual URL on my local system that I'm calling. So I'm going to copy that. Then I'm going to go back into Postman. I'm going to paste it right here. And you'll notice I have all those different verbs. In fact, there's a whole bunch of other ones, but these are the only ones you really care to get. So basically, I'm going to exercise my API not through the web page, but through this. So let's go ahead and do that and check it out. There's my results right there. So what's nice is once you get going, you can actually use Postman to test your API, to exercise it, do things, and it has a lot of nice features. In fact, you can create test suites in here and stuff like that, again, beyond the scope to data. If it's a post, you can do all that kind of thing there. But the thing I wanted to show you was that when you start getting into APIs, definitely get Postman and play with that because it would be a lot of fun from there. Now, one thing that's really cool about Postman that I want to share with you is that let's say you're working with someone else and that person is using a different language. Let's say they're using Python or something. You'll see over here this really cool little widget here called code. When I click on there, it brings up a whole bunch of different languages. And you can see there's tons of it. So I'll pick there and look at there. It actually took this request and created a script that you could literally paste into Python and run right away, or Objective-C, or Ruby, or Java, or things like that. So that's another thing that's really cool is once you've created your API and you provided the documentation in these tools, there are other tools that can auto-generate code to quickly work with your API. So it's pretty neat from that standpoint here. Be wary, like this cookie stuff, you know, sometimes it adds stuff in there you really don't need. I think that's a Postman thing there. But the cool thing is that you've got the built-in testing capability. We can then take that information and use tools like Postman, Ready API, Insomnia to exercise it. And you can give this documentation to your other companies that will be able to use your API, and it makes their coders will love you because you don't have to send them a bunch of documentation. They'll go on, they'll figure it out through these pieces here. You can enhance this with other stuff. So there's some more advanced techniques where you can add more documentation to it outside of the scope of today. Now, there is one important thing I wanted to cover before I open it up to questions. And I know, I apologize, I've been going through this really heavy and I'm going to stop in 2 minutes, but there's so much here and it's so much fun. So I'm going to go back into my web service. So let's go ahead and go to my web service, okay? As we talked about it, we can also protect our endpoints, which is going to be very enclosed. So you'll see right now these endpoints have like a little unlocked lock, but you'll notice that there's a button up here called require. Actually, there's 3 of them. There's require authentication, audit the API, and allow cross-domain. Require says, I want to set up an authentication method so that people have to provide some way to, before they can actually exercise that. And it's a bigger topic, but there's multiple ways to do that. The other is audit the API, which is cool. You can enable that, and then every request you could actually write into a database table. Very important for auditing and for traceability of seeing if people are trying to attack your API or doing things wrong, etc. Cross-domain, which is important, is that if the API is called directly from a browser page, this needs to be handled. So if you're doing client-side stuff, this is a little more advanced, and it's calling directly to your server versus server to server, you need to do some things to enable it from there. Again, more advanced. But let's look at this. So I'm going to say this DB data requires authentication. Now, what's nice is that Alpha allows me to create different authentication methods to lock this down. So I can look up a token in a database table. I can do many other things, and it's super flexible. It's really neat. It takes a moment to get your head around it because there's some variables to it. But the neat thing about it is that basically Alpha could say literally, you could call the Alpha web, like in there, you could literally call the Alpha security system to get whether this entity can use that API endpoint or not. You could use a simple token thing where it just looks up in a table and says, yeah, that information there. You could call out to third-party services like Okta, I think it's Okta and Auth0, etc. So you can authenticate it. You click here, and that's a whole other series of time. But that allows you to go in. Then once they're authenticated, you'll see that has a little lock. And what's neat is when you authenticate it, this page here will show a little lock, so you have to put in your authentication before you can exercise it. It's a really cool subject, a lot more beyond this, but I want to go ahead and stop it here because we only have a little time for questions and stuff, and I apologize. I know it's been a lot, but I'd like to stop and open it up for Dave and Sarah if there's any questions or things we need to cover.
Dion, that was a terrific foundation for web services. So thank you very much for doing that. Yeah, that's great. One thing I didn't realize here at the end is that Swagger actually can work with authorization, that you can put in authorization tokens or something like that. I've never tried that before, but I think we will be getting to that in a future episode. So I'm going to go take a look here at the questions. Let's start at the very beginning. I think some were actually answered behind the scenes, but here are a few that I'd like to repeat. One is, when you're in the community edition, how do you turn the line numbers on when you're doing coding in the function builder?
Oh, okay. Let me go back there. Okay. If I go to my code here, you right click in any white space here and you see you have a whole bunch of selections. That's where I got that genie, but you'll notice
right that context or right click menu. I see. Yep. And line numbers is towards the bottom. Great.
Yep. And so you do, and super important when you're working with someone because you can go to line 17 or line 19 and see what happens there. Yep.
Nice.
So you can see there's a lot of buried in here. Like for instance, you can indent code, transform code, change the case of stuff. A lot of really nice little find and replace. All that's available in your right click on the white space there.
Wow, worth exploring. Thank you. Another person had a question saying they need to create a report in Alpha Anywhere, and it needs to have barcodes on it. So he knows that there's a font for it. Is it possible to use your own fonts in Alpha Anywhere reports?
Yes, you can. Absolutely. You can include those into it and create your own fonts. Let's go to reports here. Let's create a new Let's go quick report. And I'd have to remember how you include the font, but the answer is absolutely, you can go in, I'm just creating a quick report real quick. Okay, so do a preview, and there's there. And so when you're working on stuff, like let's say I have a column right here, I can then format that column, like, in terms of its font and other pieces there. Let's go ahead and open this in the report area. I'm going to go in the full report editor at this point. So you'll see here's my detail right here.
Yep.
Edit cell content in here. I can then go in and set up the formatting and the fonts that I want to use for those pieces there. But I don't remember how to bring the font in, because you have to make sure the font is available in the app. So we might have to get back to you on that, or I would, because I'm not remembering how to do that.
Sarah, if you're there, do you know the answer offhand or not?
For the fonts, you would include the font as you would any other font in your report definition. Then you put it in a fonts folder in the project. If you go to Web Projects Control Panel, there's a option into the menu to add a fonts folder. And then any font in that font folder gets published with your project.
Oh,
click on the more drop down.
Oh, more. There we go. Man, wait.
All the way on the right.
Oh, okay.
And say create
fonts.
Yeah, all the fonts in there. Yep.
Excellent. So once you clue it in there, then you can point to it in the report, and it will use that from that standpoint. Do you realize also that there's built-in QR code presentation that's built into Alpha 2, and that's really powerful because you get a lot more data in a QR code. Yeah.
Someone said, is there any way to update the JavaScript Syntax Checker? It's giving me errors for valid code. I don't think that's something you can touch yourself. However, we'd be happy to fix it if you want to give us an example of what's not working.
Yeah, please do.
Yep.
Yeah.
Here's someone who would love to see an example of making an AJAX callback as a promise. I think we talked a little bit about that before.
Ooh, AJAX. I have not done it that way. I understand why. Just to explain to everybody, when you do an AJAX callback, it calls from the user, like the client, back to the server, and then it replies information back. What a promise is it says, give me your name and number and I'll call you back when I'm done, kind of thing. There's chunked responses, but that's not really a promise. I have used Pusher as a way to do something like that, because it's almost like a webhook deal where on the client, it's sitting there waiting for information. So you may want to investigate using like the Pusher technology, which is built into it. We did a webinar, man, that's probably a couple years ago, but it's all works really well. And the nice thing with Pusher is that for something like that, it's great. You can call an XBasic, register it. When it's done, it can call that and push something back out to there. But I'm not sure about actually using, unless that's a new feature that I'm not aware of in terms of some kind of XBasic promise where it goes off and does stuff and then calls back asynchronously. Because really, when you do an XBasic callback, it's synchronous, meaning the UX or the client is going to wait till it gets a message back. So I don't know. That's a good one.
Or give up if the timeout is elapsed. Yeah, it's a good question.
Yeah. I mean, often if you have long-running stuff, what I usually do is that the callback like inserts a record into a table, and then I have a process watching that table and executing things, and then when it's done, it sends them an email saying it's done. If you look at a lot of systems out there, let's say you're doing an export or a report that's going to be long-running or something versus a few seconds kind of scenario, they usually say, oh, great, we're preparing your report, we'll email you when it's done. Or you go to a page and refresh it, and it has the report on that page ready to be downloaded. So, but I haven't worked with any kind of promise on an XBasic callback, so not sure on that.
Interesting. Someone's asking if we have metrics for how long REST requests, how many REST requests per second, sort of a basic server instance, like a 1 core, 4 gigabytes.
Oh, not sure.
Process.
You know,
I don't know
I got
we've done a benchmark. Yeah.
No, and it's really going to depend on XBasic. If you look at this, the overhead is in your XBasic code. So the larger and more stuff your XBasic is doing, that's going to be your limiter, not the actual communication between the web service or anything like that. So if anything, optimizing your XBasic code, like a great example is, doing things in the database with a stored procedure versus doing it in XBasic. It's going to be insanely fast inside the stored procedure, whereas XBasic may be a little slower because of it's an interpreted language. So we don't have those benchmarks. I know that we have focused on making that sort of layer. If I go back here, this layer really thin, so it's fast in response, but all of your timing and your anything in terms of actual response time is going to be at this XBasic class. Now, interesting enough, built in XBasic, you can set timers and actually monitor your XBasic classes to see how long they take. You can do that in UXs and stuff like that, which is kind of neat, and grids. But in here, you could like set a start time and then create these log files to say, how long is this code running? And that's pretty straightforward. You just say start time equals now. At the end, you say end time is equal to now, subtract the two and store it or put it into a log, and you'll be able to tell exactly how much time your XBasic is running.
Awesome. That's good advice there. So I'm looking through to see if there are other questions. I'm not seeing a lot. Someone's making a comment that when we do these webinars, sometimes there are things that we paste into the chat window. Almost always they're documentation links. The sad part is that you don't see those in YouTube. So maybe I think as a solution, maybe when we do paste something in the chat window, we make it a point to also display it up on the screen so that we know for a fact it's going to get caught in the video. And then ideally, obviously, we could put it into YouTube too, but actually, it's a really good point. So yeah, I don't want you to miss content.
So if I were to do something like this, comment, Dave is trying
this is not going anywhere
to kill me. I should really put that
not on the screen, literally on the screen, rather than in the chat window. Exactly.
Me, I am blinking twice.
You're blinking twice, aren't you? Yeah, thanks.
Little Christmas cheer for everybody.
Oh yeah,
on YouTube.
Thanks so much. Well, we are out of time and out of questions. Dan, thank you very much for presenting today.
Thank you, everybody.
Appreciate it. Sarah, thanks very much for being here, answering questions behind the scenes. If you have further questions, you can go ahead and send them to guides, guides@alphasoftware.com. Hope everyone has a great week. I think we have one more Wednesday webinar next week. And until then, stay well. Take care and goodbye.